Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 18th of April 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. Well, the weather is unfortunately cold, overcast, grey here in Plymouth. We've got a report that it's also the same in Norfolk, and that's as far as the weather goes. So I'm not sure what's happening, but it seems our viewers are not interested in the weather. That's probably because the sunshine over the weekend has stopped. Well, we better get used to it being grey and dismal, because that's certainly how politics seems at the moment. But we'll start with royalty.
Well, it's a spectacular headline, isn't it, Brian? This is the shenanigans going on over in the USA at the moment. Saudi Arabia claiming that they are going to dump $750 billion worth of United States assets if the US passes a bill which would allow the Saudi royal family, amongst others, to be prosecuted by the families of the victims of September 11th. There's no question that Saudi had some capacity in that operation on September 11th, but what they actually did, what their part of the operation was, isn't clear. And of course, the 9/11 report, as far as it goes, redacted 28 pages of information which hinted at what Saudi nationals and Saudi royalty was up to.
Well, it's pretty easy, Mike, because they're now telling us they had considerable part to play in it. $750 billion worth, apparently.
That's the threat. This threat was allegedly delivered by the Saudi foreign minister during a visit to Washington last month. So we wait to see what happens. And of course, they also expressed similar sort of angst and anger at the 60 Minutes program that was broadcast on CBS on the 10th of April, which was highlighting the 28 redacted pages, which Obama absolutely refuses to unredact and release.
Well, of course, because tyrannies don't want to tell the truth, Mike. We've also got a bit of a theme during today's news about control of the press, which, of course, David Cameron is striving for.
And a spectacular report in the New York Times here over the weekend. Race for the latest class of nuclear arms threatens to revive Cold War. And of course, what they're talking about is the fact that the United States, Russia and China are all pursuing, creating, reassigning nuclear resources towards smaller tactical nuclear weapons. The Times here says the build-ups threaten to revive a Cold War-era arms race and unsettle the balance of destructive force amongst nations that has kept the nuclear peace for more than half a century. Of course, they don't mention that the worst protagonist here is the United States themselves, because they're spending $1 trillion to overhaul its nuclear arsenal. So instead, they put a Russian.
Well, everything's always focused back on the Russians, Mike, because at the moment they are the bogeyman. Everything is the Russians' fault, from Syria to Afghanistan to. So this is more of the same nonsense. But as we've shown, of course, the lion's share of the defence budget is American, and what we're consistently seeing is the Russians being put under pressure by Western forces being moved right up to their borders, which removes the warning time. So the Russians are obviously going to develop new weapon systems to counter that. It seems fairly straightforward to me.
Absolutely. Well, this is another interesting little article. I'll get you to comment on this in a second. This is in the Herald in Scotland, obviously, and the Ministry of Defence apparently accidentally released secret NATO military manual. Well, first of all, it wasn't secret, as we'll explain in a second. What they say here is the Ministry of Defence has accidentally released a secret NATO report with code words, ciphers, coordinates, radio frequencies, and a host of other special instructions. And this was all to do with the Joint Warrior 161 war games, which are going on around Scotland at the moment. This was a 192-page manual. It was given to fishing fleets and ferry operators on the 29th of March, apparently. They were supposed to receive a guide as to when and where the places they were likely to be would be affected by this exercise. And they got this thing instead. And I'll just quote one paragraph here. It says, They were given technical details of aircraft kill box target areas, code decryption tables, radio jamming rules, and authentication protocols, as well as dozens of code words, call signs, and map coordinates. But this report was marked NATO restricted.
Yeah. There's something very weird about this story, Mike, because as I've explained before, the way the classifications work is that national classifications and US classifications have a much higher status than anything to do with NATO. So were these documents just to be UK restricted, they would almost have no caveat on them at all. NATO restricted is equivalent to toilet paper, to use that crude analogy. But if you're mentioning frequencies jamming electronic warfare type information, this would certainly be confidential. So it appears to me the Ministry of Defence is utterly lying over this whole story. And how did this stuff get released? It was a mistake. Somebody made a mistake.
And just to clarify, confidential would be a much higher rating than...
Well, confidential would be a rating of sufficient importance that if the ordinary man in the military lost a confidential page, let alone a confidential document, they could expect to be court-martialed probably, unless of course you're Oliver Letwin and you lose whole documents in waste bins in London. Alan West, I believe, was another man who lost the odd document, but he was court-martialed as well. So confidential minimum, but there's something very strange. I think the Ministry of Defence is lying about the whole story. This document can't possibly have been restricted. We'll see, but yes. Is this an explanation? Let's come back to the head of the Royal Air Force, Sir Andrew Pulford. So we just read what this man said because it gives you an insight into how the Ministry of Defence is working these days. So what is this new Thinking to Win, T2W programme really attempting to do right across the RAF? It is primarily to reinvigorate thinking through a cultural change programme. It is about clarifying focus, inspiring innovation, asserting air power influence, and equipping leaders with sufficient skills to drive through innovation. T2W is there to define, optimise, and communicate RAF strategy. And in my view, this is far more than being seen as yet another strategy narrative. It's a real strategy designed to clarify, equip, optimise, and inspire. And it's so good, Mike, that they're simply losing classified documents. So if this wasn't funny, well, it isn't funny, of course, because this is common purpose newspeak. This is a form of brainwashing, and clearly they've now got the head of the Royal Air Force unable to think in any form of common sense manner. Russians must be quaking at this point, I would imagine.
I would have thought so.
Or is it the F-35 they're quaking about?
Now, let's move on.
We better pause because I'm at the point where I don't know what to say. It's obvious something is seriously wrong at the moment within UK.
Now, of course, we've been told for a number of years now that everybody hates President Assad. So it's perhaps surprising to some, anyway, what happened over the Syrian election. So this is a report from Patrick Henningson's 21st Century War, saying Syria's ruling Ba'ath Party and its allies have won the majority of the votes in the recent parliamentary elections in the country. Official results show, and they're saying that they had a 58% turnout, which is better than you get in the United Kingdom, I think. And certainly, well, they're highlighting that it's virtually identical to Canada's last federal election. And although the turnout was different in different parts of the country, so what they're saying here is 80% turnout in Homs, 52% turnout in Tartus. And they say that also significant was the fact that over 140,000 refugees returned from across the Lebanese border in just one day, just in order to vote. So that's they voted for Assad, of course, and his Ba'ath Party. And Paul Craig Roberts a couple of days ago really hitting pretty hard on the same subject. Syrian elections prove again that Washington and its prostitutes lie through their teeth. And he says that Syria held parliamentary elections at 7,000 polling stations, keeping the voting open an extra 5 hours to accommodate the massive turnout. Washington is angry because Syria held elections before Washington had time to purchase its slate of politicians and organise Washington-funded NGOs to take to the streets to protest and to claim that Assad had stolen the election. Despite the massive voter turnout and extended hours for voting, the US State Department set its tone by declaring the elections are not legitimate in Washington's eyes and do not represent the will of the Syrian people. So that's good. And then he goes on to say, Washington's two-bit punk vassals in London and Paris chimed in, both claiming that the war conditions in Syria, to which London and Paris have contributed, mean that the idea of elections is totally unrealistic. Nonetheless, a turnout that Britain would be envious of, and a result that Britain would be envious of.
Yes, we're going to be talking about EU referendum in a minute and prostitutes. I think it's all sounding good.
Yes. Right. And in Yemen, of course, there are peace talks in the pipeline. Are they going to happen? Well, they're delayed because despite the ceasefire, this conflict continues. Guardian here saying representatives of Houthi rebels and ex-Syrian ex-President Salah have yet to leave the capital for talks in Kuwait, blaming Saudi airstrikes. And of course, Saudi Arabia, right at the centre of this nasty little conflict as well. Now, why am I mentioning this? Because on tomorrow's news, we're going to have Vanessa Beeley on to discuss this subject in detail. And of course, Vanessa will be speaking at AV7 on the weekend of the 13th, 14th and 15th of May. And she's going to be discussing the role of NGOs in conflict areas, including Syria. And this continues to be timely because this tweet was pushed out by the Foreign Office today, that UK aid is helping provide clean water, sanitation and essential medicines and funding for NGOs and charities helping So they're not sending clean water, sanitation, essential medicines and funding for local people. They're sending them to the NGOs.
Yeah. Well, of course, and then they can be bagged up and bottled up and sold abroad.
And sold abroad, and the money go to ISIS and so on. That's basically what goes on. So
it's corruption, Mike.
Yes, indeed. So Vanessa will be talking about that at AV7. And speaking of AV7, Ian Crane has announced that Anthony Carlin, the Northern Irish policeman who was jailed recently for contempt of court for arresting a judge, will be speaking at that event. And as I say, 13th, 14th, 15th of May, Ian reports that there are only 8 rooms left for the weekend. So if you're thinking about going to that, you probably shouldn't hesitate too much longer. And tonight, Ian will be back with Humanity versus Insanity. Zen Gardner will be on at 7:30 with him. And at 9 o'clock, as usual, Fracking Nightmare. So join us for those 2 live programmes later on this evening, if you get the chance.
Excellent. We'll also give people a reminder that this Wednesday is the UK Column local meeting in the George Inn in Plimpton, just outside Plymouth. So if you haven't been before and you're local or you can travel, please do come down. And we will be joined by Justin Walker from the British Constitution Group and, of course, big campaigner for the Bradbury Pound. So if you'd like to meet Justin, possibly meet his French bulldog as well, he will be there with us.
It is a poodle, isn't it?
Bulldog. Bulldog. Right, well, let's come on to probably a poodle, David Cameron, because the evidence is all there. It's been there in the press for some time. We just thought that it would be useful today, particularly to have a look at the EU referendum and what the press has managed to tell us, despite David Cameron's efforts to get state control of the press. So this is going back. It was a Mail report. It said the phony election, bogus rallies, photo stunts, vacuous sound bites, and the press banned. Never before have all parties so cynically tried to dupe voters. And this was a Stephen Glover article. It was backed up by this picture, which of course shows that the first image you see is completely false. This is an empty chicken shed, which is being used by the Tories to spin a so-called press and media briefing. So bring in the man. Of course, this is David Cameron, the puppet who is trying at the moment to lock us into the fraudulent European Union. And where are we really going? Well, he's acting beyond authority. in line with his common purpose training. We are looking at election fraud and ultimately the rush to a communitarian state. Well, just to give a bit of background as to what sort of Conservative Party we're dealing with, of course, we revealed that children were being abused at Oxford and Cherwell Valley College. That college on David Cameron's Witney constituency doorstep. What did David and his Tories do? Absolutely nothing. They were not interested in helping the Muslim gentleman who blew the whistle on child abuse at this college. The local Tories did nothing. So we thought we'd just remind viewers, here's one of them, Councillor Louise Chapman, Conservative, Cabinet Member for Children of the Voluntary Section, no tangible action over the OCVC abuse. We could bring in Barry Norton, Tory leader of West Oxfordshire District Council, election agent for David Cameron. None of these local Tories wanted to get involved at all. Quite clearly, the Conservative Party does not care about child abuse, or at least wants to make sure it stays well clear of the door. Well, where did David Cameron come from? Who put him into power? Thank you to the viewer that reminded us of this article going back to 2006 from the Jewish Chronicle. And if you have a look at this excellent article, of course, what it talks about is the men who donated vast amounts of money, £250,000, £103,000, £250,000 of money to help David Cameron get into power. And in this article, of course, it quickly flags up key people, and here he is. Other senior figures around the leader include Oliver Letwin, head of policy. Now, UK column is alone in the moment, pointing out that it is Oliver Letwin that is running the Cabinet Office, is running David Cameron, is running the Tory party, and is running government. And his speciality is privatisation, in line with his book and his former work with NM Rothschild. So here's David with his boys, One Direction David Cameron. Who put him in power? Well, people with vast amounts of wealth, as being identified by the Jewish Chronicle. And what's David Cameron been very keen on? Taking control of the press. So as a result of his efforts with Mr. Leveson, we've then got the rise of the falsely independent press regulators. We mentioned Impress last week. We sent them an email saying, would they like to explain how their board is appointed by a fair and open process by their own appointment panel. It was a reasonable email, reasonable question, and of course what's come back is absolutely no reply, Mike. So if you want transparency, don't bother looking in the direction of Impress, the first truly independent press regulator in the UK. Which brings us nicely to the royal family.
Yes, and well, the question is, should we have one? Certainly not this particular one. This is the UK government wanting to keep secret the discussions between government and Prince Charles. This went to the Information Commissioner, and he said that because a lot of it was environmental related, that it was in the public interest to release it. But that was then taken to court. And they have won an appeal of that. And apparently Judge Lane, as he's called, Peter Richard Lane, has decided that they can keep this stuff secret. So there you go. Now, Judge Lane, he became a solicitor in 1985. He was appointed as a fee-paid immigration adjudicator in 1996. He's not a proper judge. He's a tribunal. He chairs a tribunal. He was a salaried immigration adjudicator in 2001, and he was appointed as a senior immigration judge in 2003, becoming judge of the Upper Tribunal, Immigration and Asylum Chamber, and he became a member of the Special Immigration Appeals Commission in 2005. So he was appointed to be president of the General Regulatory Chamber of the First Tier Tribunal. So there you go. Do you know what that is?
I don't.
No, I haven't got a clue either. But anyway, it's clearly made a decision in this case. And he's been in that job since 2014. Peter Richard Lane, known as Judge Lane, but of course he's not.
So the UK government wins the right to keep information away from the public.
Yes.
Yeah, we're general public simply not important. What's important is that David Cameron's government can do what they like and keep it secret.
Keep it secret, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Well, let's come back to the EU referendum, because obviously we can expect lots of transparency there. This was an interesting article from a little while ago by Frederick Forsyth in the Express. He says that the Brits won't accept an unfair referendum. Europe, we demand a vote. Here's the man himself. He said, "We Brits will tolerate just about anything if it's fair. The Brexit campaign has so far kept a pretty civil tongue in its head. Not so the Downing Street-led litany of dirty tricks and abuse." So this man calling a spade, Mike, we're describing it as it is. Dirty tricks, abuse. This is David Cameron's Conservative government. In this article, there's an embedded video where David Cameron, of course, is saying we must stay in Europe because otherwise Britain will apparently fall apart. But what we're really looking at is a Prime Minister utterly betraying his country. Now, I was really pleased to get this email in today from somebody who is absolutely on the ball with what's going on. They said, "I taxed my car online today, and there was a section on the government webpage about Europe. Looking into the body of information provided, it was heavily propagandized for staying in Europe. I thought the government were not allowed to use the government administrative machinery to lead the debate, though you might like to take a look." Thought you might like to take a look. Well, what they're talking about this is the government page, all about taxing your vehicle, but at the top there's a banner headline, and it says on Thursday, the 23rd of June, there'll be a vote on UK's membership.
I mean, this is really important because the government website is the portal for every interaction between members of the public and the government, and on every single page where the public are likely to go to have some interaction with the government, they are pushing a pro-EU message.
Yeah, this is vicious nudging. It's applied psychology so that anybody goes near any subject on this site and in it comes. And what did the person pick up? Well, here they are. You click on that little link and you are you're into page after page of blatant government propaganda trying to have us believe that the EU is something other than a corrupt dictatorship. Well, some people are out on the streets, and we've got to give them credit. This is a few people in David Cameron's Witney constituency. They were clearly not convinced by David's comments about the EU. And it brings us nicely into UK Column News Special, the EU corporatist racket. This was the interview we did with this gentleman, Dave Barmby. And this is what he said in an email recently. "It's recently struck me that in February 1971, just 20% of the population, according to the poll of polls, the graph is in his own book, only 20% wanted to join the then common market. Yet in the 1975 referendum, 66 voted to stay in, a swing of an unlikely 330%. And what Mr. Barmby has been warning the public is, of course, this massive swing in the polls was achieved by propaganda hidden from the British public, the European movement in particular, given millions of pounds of government money in order to start a campaign of propaganda to change the polls. And where the blue and the pink line cross, this is where that campaign achieved success, even allowing for vote counting, which was no doubt rigged. But this is what we've got. This is psychological manipulation, propaganda, and Dave Barmby absolutely on the ball in warning people about it. Well, other people are also concerned about this. So we've got the Express EU referendum vote could be overseen by international monitors. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? State of affairs in 2016.
I think they should be brought in from Russia.
I think they should be brought in from Russia. Well, have a look at this, because what does the Express say? Well, it's only a bit of cheating. It's a little bit of cheating.
Okay, then that's
So-
I'm
so
relieved.
we've got-
I'm relieved.
We've got vote rigging and electoral fraud, but according to the Express, it's just a little bit of cheating. But who do they blame? Who do they say are the bad boys? Well, we've got the 700th anniversary of the signing of Magna Carta, but we could be faced with the humiliating prospect of joining the ranks of Russia. So those nasty Russians have got into all of that vote rigging.
Yeah.
Well, what are we going to do about it? Well, we need a Tory MP, Nigel Evans, to tell us what to do. And what do you think he suggests? Well, what he suggests is that we actually go back to the European Union to ask them to monitor the EU referendum. No, this is true. It's reported here that this gentleman says the way we stop the vote rigging is we're going to ask the Council of Europe to help us. And if we look at the Council of Europe, the same people started it who started the European Union. So there we are. There's a bit of Westminster logic there, Mike. I think they may be using the same people who've been running the RAF, apparently.
I think perhaps we should start by asking what companies, because of course this has all been, as we've mentioned before, this has all been outsourced. Which companies are going to be running this election? So we know that IDOX is one of the companies that's going to be running this election. They, of course, run both the electoral roll, the postal vote, and the ballots. So if there's going to be any postal vote fraud, which is what we believe happened in the general election, they would be very well placed to do that if they wish to do so.
Indeed.
And it is perhaps unsurprising if we mention that Peter Lilly is a non-executive director of that company. Now, they say on their website that they manage the elections for about 13 million people in this country, so that's a significant proportion of the country. So we shall see. If
we'll watch with interest.
Absolutely.
We just remind ourselves that it's the nasty Russians that provide that model. If you want to know about corruption in elections, you should be looking at the Russians. Of course, nobody wants to look at this little story here, because let's come back to Britain. And this is the Mail reporting on a first-class champagne trip by this lady. She's the famous Lynn Homer, common purpose guru, future leader. And in the article itself, we only pick out a few bits, but she was originally working as the chief executive of Birmingham City Council, and she led a string of scandals and failures, including the postal vote scandal, which a judge said would have disgraced a banana republic. And she goes on to throw the rule book of elections out the window. She's promoted into immigration. She's promoted into the border agency. She's promoted into the treasury. But we should be looking at Russia because those nasty Russians have done it. I don't think so. This is a common purpose future leader. I think we should just stick on common purpose. Perhaps we should put her in charge of the military, Mike.
That would be a perfect place for her.
I think it would be really good. We'll send her on a champagne date with the present head of the RAF. I should think they'll have a wonderful conversation.
Yeah. Well, speaking of government propaganda, the Treasury has now issued its 200-page propaganda report. And it's saying that if we leave the EU, there would be a cut in GDP equivalent to about 4,300 people a year for every household. So what they're saying is Britain will be worse off by 4,300 per year per household if Britain votes to leave the EU. And what's the next thing they're saying? The analysis also finds that the negative impact on the economy would result in a total reduction of tax receipts of £36 billion, equivalent to around an 8p increase in the basic rate of income tax. They're also saying the UK is estimated to be between 3.4% and 4.3% of GDP better off inside the EU, so that's good. Better off inside the EU than in membership with the European Economic Area like Norway. They said the UK is estimated to be between 4.6% and 7.8% of GDP better off inside the EU than with a negotiated bilateral agreement like Canada, Turkey or Switzerland. And they're saying that the UK is estimated to be between 5.4% and 9.5% of economic output better off inside the EU than adopting rules of the World Trade Organization like Russia or Brazil? Well, I would like to ask what percentage of GDP has been spent on producing this trash. And I think if anybody would like to submit a couple of freedom of information requests and ask some pertinent questions about this, because just to remind you, as we highlighted last week, Cameron and Osborne have spent almost £10 million on this ridiculous propaganda leaflet that they sent out to every house last week, and yet they are not supposed to take part in this referendum in this way. They're now using the civil service to generate 200-page reports full of this type of propaganda. How much does this cost? So when you look at the amount of money the In campaign has to spend so far, it's already around £16 million, whereas the Leave campaign is getting £7 million from the Electoral Commission to run their campaign. So it's clearly an extremely fair campaign. Osborne, of course, had this to say: these people who go around saying that Britain would have all the benefits of the EU without any of the obligations, that is economically illiterate and frankly totally misunderstands the nature of the relationship that Britain might be able to strike outside the EU. So he's now slagging off anybody that suggests that we would be better off out.
Has he been drinking Coke?
I don't know what he's been on, but certainly for Osborne to suggest that anybody is economically illiterate, bearing in mind the national debt has doubled since the deficit has doubled since he became Chancellor. I think he is living in cloud cuckoo land. But of course he also took to Facebook to tell us all about how great it would be to stay in. So every platform available for his propaganda is being used. Now we can't reserve our criticism only for the Remain campaign, of course. The Out campaign, we have been calling this the EU referendum PSYOP from the beginning, and that's exactly what it is, because the Out campaign utterly controlled now as well. And of course the Out campaign has been awarded its grant by the Electoral Commission. Well, Chris Grayling here, talking last night, said, tonight, Nigel Farage and I, side by side for the next few weeks, we have a common purpose for our country. Okay. And I don't think there's any more needs to be said about the Out campaign as it is at the moment.
Well, this is true, but what an interesting expression that he's got a common purpose with Nigel Farage. I'll say it again, I've been saying it for years, Mike. If you follow what Nigel Farage has done, he's given speech after speech. He rouses the passion in people. He says some very laudable and correct things, but there's never any follow-up. So 4 million plus UKIP voters have been doing very little compared to what they could have been doing if they were properly grouped up. And of course, what has Nigel Farage been doing? He's been making sure that UKIP's tremendous support across the country isn't focused on what it needs to be done. And who's he in bed with? Conservatives. Is that why they celebrated? Didn't celebrate in Plymouth when UKIP had a bad spell in Plymouth. The local Tories were looking very glum. I think there's a very cosy relationship. Common purpose is a good word. And of course, Nigel Farage would also not support exposure of the pernicious political charity Common Purpose. So I think a lot of digging needs to be done into Mr. Farage and what game he's really playing. In bed with Chris Grayling, nice. Well, let's come back on facts of the matter. We've got Breitbart here with an exclusive. Over half of the Electoral Commission committee members have EU conflicts of interest, but it's a fair and transparent and independent referendum, Mike, as you can imagine. So this is part of this story. 3 of the 10 members of the Electoral Commission committee that decided on the designation for the official Leave campaign had to excuse themselves from the meeting due to EU links, with a further 3 also declaring interest but still allowed to sit in, raising fears over the Commission's neutrality. Do we understand that? So they're linked to the EU, but they're independent and neutral. Well,
this explains a lot.
It does. So we'll bring in the main woman herself. Here's the committee chair, Jenny Watson, and she couldn't be present because she's got potential conflicts of interest. but it's all independent, Mike.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, where does this leave us? It leads us to some interesting comments that David Cameron is going to stay, or is he going to go if the Leave campaign wins? And this is an email sent to us, and it says, Leave campaign bigwigs support Cameron staying as PM if a no vote. Also think he's best man for negotiating the out process. These people are unbelievable. As you've said, it's a PSYOP out campaign that will do just enough to assure that they lose by a small margin. They get the money for the campaign when UKIP, with a huge grassroots base and mandate in the EU elections, got virtually nothing. Every person I've spoken to on the issue, from a vast array of political viewpoints, are all voting Leave. Everyone they know is voting Leave, yet we won't win. It will appear to be a close-run thing, stitch up all round, I'm sad to say. So Darren there clearly knows his stuff.
Well, I have to say, this is purely anecdotal, of course, but I have yet to meet somebody that intends to vote to stay in.
So it's going to be close.
Yes.
It's going to be close. Well, let's see what they've been saying about Cameron, because David Cameron must resign if Britain's vote to quit the EU, according to Ken Clarke. And he's warning the Prime Minister. He said we'd be plunged into a Conservative leadership crisis, which is never a very edifying sight. He'd be a Prime Minister facing a Parliament in which the majority of the MPs wanted to remain in the EU. Leave is a minority in the Conservative Parliamentary Party. So we thought we should ask who Ken Clarke is in bed with. This is the key question. And of course, what we need to go back is Ken Clarke and the Bilderbergers. And this was a Mr. Clarke under considerable pressure when he had to actually state in Westminster what relationship he had. And he did squirm quite visibly. But here's the BBC, of course. Ken Clarke, Bilderberg conspiracy claims are nonsense. So let's just remind ourselves that here's the June 2013, just a proportion of the bankers who were present at that Bilderberg meeting. They were meeting senior politicians behind closed doors, including David Cameron, George Osborne, Mr. Clarke himself, Mike.
He was on the steering committee at the time.
Indeed. But don't worry, there's nothing to see. These bankers, they just got together for some tea and cucumber sandwiches, no crusts, and nothing really going on at all.
Well, indeed. Well, in the meantime, let's talk a bit about finance. Just a very quick story here. This is from the FT. And I just wanted to mention the fact that corporate borrowers are defaulting in unbelievable amounts at the moment. $50 billion of debt defaulted on so far this year, and we're only just about in the second quarter. They said that 5 new defaults occurred last week, including 2 more US shale oil gas producers, so that'll please Ian Crane. And the only higher rate in the 21st century was in 2009, which was just immediately after the financial collapse. And then there were $60 billion of defaults. Now, this is a pretty significant situation because, of course, we're told everything is all rosy in the financial system and in the economy. And although we're not growing quite as much as China, it's all fine. But this clearly is not fine.
Corporate borrowers default, so they get the bailiffs around, Mike, and are put in court, and their assets are stolen. Is that what happens?
Depends on the size of the company. Generally not.
Okay, the bigger the company, the less it's likely to happen.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
yes, and last week, of course, we mentioned what's the colour revolution that's going on in Brazil at the moment. We pointed out that a committee of the lower house of Congress had voted 38 to 27 to recommend impeachment of President Rousseff. That went to the full lower house yesterday. And the 2/3 majority was achieved, so that now goes to the Senate, and basically that could take another 6 months to get to the point of a vote in the Senate. But this, at the end of the day, is because she allegedly manipulated the fiscal situation in Brazil just prior to the last general election, which meant that her party won. And of course, that would never happen in Britain.
No.
So it's a pretty minor political offence, and not really grounds for impeachment. And certainly, anybody that's looking at this impartially believes that this was not what the impeachment rules were set up for. So this is a colour revolution that's going on. Of course, there's massive popular support for her impeachment, being driven by the Soros-like NGOs in Brazil at the moment.
So big money, George Soros empire controlling politics, not only in Britain but in other countries as well,
absolutely,
which we've talked about. So let's just remind ourselves, let's bring on David Cameron. We've shown that he's been receiving vast amounts of money from very wealthy individuals whose interests are not necessarily the interests of the British public. The bankers are there amongst them. And let's have a look at some of his language again. One nation, one United Kingdom, which we're going to achieve by devolution, which really means breaking the country apart. And they're going to reshape the future of the United Kingdom itself. So none of this debated in Westminster, none of this debated with the British public. But David Cameron, he's a revolutionary, isn't he, Mike, here? This is communitarianism. This is what the reality of big society is. He's bringing it in, and that is why he's desperate to stay in the EU. Now, as I might have expected, a few people in the chat box are getting a little bit upset that we've actually pointed a finger at Nigel Farage. I am well aware that we have millions of good people voting for UKIP, quite right too. The point of the UK column is that if you follow through Nigel Farage as a leader, he has steadfastly refused to engage with all the key subjects which are required in order to tackle the government head on. And that includes money, the banks, it includes the Bradbury pound, it involves child abuse, the fraud and corruption, what's happening in the British courts. We've had silence on these issues from Nigel Farage for year after year after year. And of course, the big subject which Nigel Farage, UKIP leader, ran away from was the subject of the political charity Common Purpose. And now, strangely, in 2016, he's in bed, it appears, with Common Purpose. Well, we leave you to think about what that means. But if you say, what can we do? We're going to say to you, the answer is for people to tell the truth and work together. Lawful rebellion, many small people together armed with the truth can achieve very big things. And the minimum we need to do is, of course, purge Westminster of the corrupt, subversive politicians. It's possible, Mike.
Yes.
Absolutely. Three-headed monster. Where does that leave us?
Is that it?
That is it. Thank you very much for joining us. We will be back at the same time tomorrow. Don't sit at home fretting. Get out, talk to other people, and of course, warn them of the corruption in Westminster. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.